The rifle barrel pressed cold against Josephine Dalton's temple as her husband's whiskey-soaked breath burned her cheek, and she knew with absolute certainty that if she did not run tonight, she would never see another sunrise. It was late May in 1872, and the humid air of Independence, Missouri hung thick in their small wooden house on the edge of town. Charles had been drinking since noon, and the rage that had been building in him for weeks finally erupted when she accidentally let the cornbread burn. The blow to her face had sent her reeling against the iron stove, but it was the moment he reached for his gun that something inside her finally broke free from the prison of fear she had been living in for 3 terrible years. She was 22 years old, though she felt ancient. The girl who had married Charles Dalton at 19, believing his promises of a good life, had died slowly over the months and years of his fists and his fury. Tonight, as he finally passed out in his chair with the rifle sliding from his lap, Josephine made a decision that would change everything. She moved through the dark house like a ghost, gathering only what she could carry. A canvas bag with 2 dresses, her mother's silver locket, the small amount of money she had hidden in the flour tin, a canteen, and the knife she used for cutting vegetables. She took bread, dried meat, and apples. Then she slipped out the back door and ran. The night was her ally as she moved through the sleeping town, heading west. She knew Charles would come after her. He had told her 100 times that she belonged to him, that he would kill her before he let her leave. She believed him. So she ran with purpose, knowing that simply getting away was not enough. She had to disappear into the wilderness, into the vast territories where a man like Charles, who never ventured far from his whiskey and his card games, might lose her trail. By dawn, she had covered nearly 8 miles, her lungs burning and her feet blistering in the worn boots she wore. The first river came into view as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the water gold and pink. The little blue river was not wide, but the current ran swift with spring snowmelt from the distant mountains. Josephine stood on the bank, her whole body trembling from exhaustion and fear. She could hear dogs barking in the far distance, and her heart seized with terror. She did not know if they were farm dogs, or if Charles had somehow already discovered her absence and roused the town to search for her. She waded into the cold water, gasping as it soaked through her skirt and petticoats. The current pulled at her legs, trying to sweep her downstream, but she fought against it, step by step, until she reached the opposite bank. Her teeth chattered as she climbed out, water streaming from her clothes. She did not stop to rest. She kept moving west, wringing out her skirt as she walked, letting the rising sun begin to dry her. The land opened up before her, rolling prairie dotted with stands of cottonwood and oak. She had never been this far from Independence, had never traveled alone anywhere. Charles had kept her close, isolated from friends and family. Her parents had died of cholera the year before she married, and her only sister had moved to St. Louis with her husband. Josephine had no one, which was perhaps why she had stayed as long as she had. But now, stumbling through the tall grass with the morning sun warming her back, she felt something she had not felt in years: hope. She walked all day, stopping only to drink from her canteen and eat small pieces of bread. The landscape changed gradually, becoming more rugged. She crossed deer trails and saw antelope in the distance. Hawks circled overhead. By late afternoon, her body was screaming for rest, but she pushed on until she reached the second river. The big blue river was wider and deeper than the first, its waters dark and churning. Josephine stood at the edge, looking for a place to cross. Her legs shook beneath her, weak from the miles and the lack of proper food. She followed the bank north for nearly an hour until she found a place where the river widened and seemed shallower. A fallen cottonwood stretched partway across, and she made her way along it, balancing carefully until she had to drop into the water and wade the final stretch. The current was stronger here, pulling her sideways. Water rose to her waist, then her chest. She held her bag above her head, her feet slipping on the rocky bottom. For a terrifying moment, she thought she would be swept away, drowned in her flight to freedom. But her boots found purchase on a large stone, and she lunged forward, scrambling up the far bank with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She collapsed in the grass, coughing and shaking. The sun was lowering toward the horizon, painting long shadows across the land. She knew she could not stop for long. Charles would be coming. He would be furious, murderous. She forced herself to stand, to keep walking, though every muscle in her body protested. As darkness fell, she found a small grove of trees and made a rough camp. She did not dare light a fire. Instead, she wrapped herself in her damp shawl and ate more of the bread, which was nearly gone. She could hear coyotes yipping in the distance, and every sound made her jump. But exhaustion finally claimed her, and she fell into a fitful sleep. She woke before dawn, stiff and cold. Her body ached in ways she had never experienced. But she gathered her things and started walking again, always west, toward the distant mountains she could now see as faint blue shadows on the horizon. She knew she had to reach the third river, had to put as much distance as possible between herself and the man who would kill her if he caught her. The third day of her flight brought her to rougher country. The prairie gave way to hills covered with pine and cedar. She saw elk grazing in a meadow and heard the rush of water long before she saw it. The Kansas River appeared before her in the late afternoon, wide and powerful, snaking through a valley flanked by steep wooded hills. Josephine stood at the top of a rise, looking down at the river. This one she could not cross easily. It was too wide, too fast. She would have to follow it, find a ford or perhaps a settlement where she could beg passage on a ferry. She made her way down the slope, her feet sliding on loose gravel, grabbing at tree branches to steady herself. She was halfway down when she heard it, the sound of a horse behind her, back the way she had come. Her blood turned to ice. She scrambled behind a large boulder and peered back up the trail. There, silhouetted against the late afternoon sky, was Charles Dalton on his bay gelding. Even from a distance, she could see the rifle across his saddle. Terror unlike anything she had ever known flooded through her. He had found her. After 3 days, after 2 rivers, he had tracked her down. She pressed herself against the boulder, trying to think. She could not outrun a horse. She had no weapon except her small kitchen knife. If he saw her, it was over. She watched as he rode slowly down the trail, his head turning from side to side, reading the signs she had left. He was 50 yards away, then 40. Josephine's breath came in short, silent gasps. She looked toward the river, judging the distance. If she ran now, she might make it to the water, but then what? He would shoot her in the back as she tried to swim. Then she heard another sound, different from the plodding hooves of Charles's horse. It was the creak of leather and the jingle of tack, coming from downstream along the river. She turned her head carefully and saw a figure emerging from the trees that lined the water's edge. The man who appeared was unlike anyone Josephine had ever seen. He sat astride a massive roan horse, and he himself was enormous, broad-shouldered and thick with muscle. He wore buckskin trousers and a heavy shirt, with a wide-brimmed hat shading his face. His hair was dark and fell past his shoulders, and a full beard covered the lower half of his face. He had a rifle resting easily across his saddle, and he moved with the confidence of someone who belonged to this wild country. He saw Charles first, and he saw the way the man was hunting, tracking something or someone with single-minded focus. Then his eyes, which were a startling pale blue even from a distance, shifted to the boulder where Josephine hid. Their gazes met for just a second, and she saw him take in her terrified face, her desperate situation, with a quick intelligence. The mountain man guided his horse directly into Charles's path, moving with deliberate casualness. Charles pulled up short, his hand moving to his rifle. "Afternoon," the big man said, his voice a deep rumble that carried easily in the still air. "Get out of my way," Charles said, his voice tight with anger. "I am tracking my wife. She ran off, and I mean to bring her home." "That's so." The mountain man did not move. His horse stood like a statue, blocking the narrow trail. "Seems like a lot of effort coming all this way." "She belongs to me," Charles said, and Josephine could hear the dangerous edge in his voice. "Now move, or I will move you." The mountain man was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, colder. "I have been in these mountains for 8 years. I have seen a lot of things. I have seen men hunt animals, and I have seen animals hunt men, but I have never much cared for the sight of a man hunting a woman like she was prey." "This is none of your concern," Charles said, his hand tightening on his rifle. "That is my wife, and I have every legal right to take her home." "Legal right," the mountain man repeated slowly. "Well now, I suppose we are a fair distance from any law out here, which means legal right does not mean much. What means something is whether a man has the strength to enforce what he thinks he is owed." Charles stared at him, and Josephine could see her husband calculating, measuring. Charles was not a small man, but next to this mountain of muscle and sinew blocking his path, he looked almost slight. Still, he had the rifle, and he had the desperation of a man who had been defied. "I am going to ask you one more time to move," Charles said. "And I am going to tell you no," the mountain man replied. "In fact, I am going to suggest you turn that horse around and ride back to wherever you came from. Leave the woman be." "You do not understand," Charles said, his voice rising. "She is mine. I married her proper. She has no right to run." "Every creature has the right to run from something that means it harm," the mountain man said. "I have watched rabbits run from coyotes and deer run from wolves, and I have never once thought they did not have that right." Charles raised his rifle, pointing it at the mountain man's chest. Josephine bit back a scream, but the big man did not flinch, did not reach for his own weapon. He simply sat there, calm as stone, his pale blue eyes fixed on Charles. "You can shoot me," he said quietly, "but understand that if you do, it will be the last thing you ever do. I have friends in these hills, Arapaho hunters who trade with me. They will find you before you make it back to the Kansas border, and what they do to men who kill their friends is not quick." It was a bluff, Josephine thought, but it was delivered with such absolute conviction that even she half believed it. Charles hesitated, the rifle wavering slightly. "And if you do not shoot me," the mountain man continued, "then you have to ask yourself if you truly want to fight me for her. Because I promise you, friend, that is a fight you will not walk away from." The silence stretched between them. Josephine could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the rush of the river, the whisper of wind through the pines. Charles's face was red with rage and humiliation, but she could see the fear there too. He was a bully and a brute, but he was not truly brave. He had beaten her because she could not fight back. Facing this mountain of a man was something entirely different. "This is not over," Charles finally said, his voice shaking. "She is my wife." "Was," the mountain man corrected. "I expect she was your wife. I would say that ended when she crossed the first river running from you. Now she is just a woman trying to survive. And I am just a man who does not take kindly to hunters in my territory." Charles stared at him for another long moment, then jerked his horse's head around viciously and spurred it back up the trail. The mountain man sat watching until horse and rider disappeared over the rise. Only then did he turn his attention to the boulder where Josephine still crouched, shaking. "You can come out now," he said gently. "He is gone." Josephine stood on trembling legs, holding onto the boulder for support. She tried to speak, but no words came. The man swung down from his horse with an easy grace that belied his size. Up close, he was even more imposing. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed broad enough to block out the sun. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even through his shirt. But his eyes, those startling blue eyes, were kind. "You are safe," he said. "I am Marcus Zimmerman. I trap and hunt in these mountains. I have a cabin about 3 miles upstream." "He will come back," Josephine managed to whisper. "When you leave, he will come back for me." Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, madam, he will not. Men like that are cowards at heart. They only fight when they know they cannot lose. He saw that he could lose here, so he ran. And when he gets back to wherever home is, he will tell himself and anyone who will listen that you died out here, taken by wolves or Indians or whatever story makes him feel less weak. But he will not come back." "How can you be sure?" "Because I am going to follow him for a few miles, make certain he truly leaves. And if he does not, I will make it very clear to him what his choices are." He paused, studying her face, seeing the bruises there that had started to fade to yellow and green. His expression darkened. "Did he do that to you?" Josephine touched her cheek unconsciously and nodded. "Then I am glad I was here," Marcus said quietly. "Wait for me by the river. There is a clearing just down this slope where the bank is gentle. I will return within the hour, and then we will get you somewhere safe and warm. You look about ready to fall over." He swung back onto his horse and rode up the trail, following the path Charles had taken. Josephine watched him go, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. This stranger had stood between her and certain death, had faced down an armed man without hesitation. She did not understand why, but she was too exhausted and too grateful to question it deeply. She made her way down to the clearing he had described, a pretty spot where wildflowers grew among the grass and the river burbled over smooth stones. She sat down heavily, her legs finally giving out completely. She was safe. The words repeated in her mind like a prayer. She was safe. Marcus returned as the sun was beginning to set, the sky turning brilliant shades of orange and purple. He rode into the clearing and dismounted, pulling supplies from his saddlebags. "He is gone," he said. "I followed him 5 miles east. He never looked back, just rode hard like the devil was chasing him. He will not trouble you again." Relief washed over Josephine so powerfully that she began to cry. She had not cried once in the 3 days of running, had not allowed herself that weakness. But now, sitting beside this river with this strange savior watching her with concern, she could not stop the tears. Marcus knelt beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You are safe now," he said again. "I give you my word, no one will hurt you while I am around." "Thank you," she managed between sobs. "I do not even know how to thank you properly. You saved my life." "No thanks needed. Any decent man would have done the same." He pulled a canteen from his belt and offered it to her. "Drink. Then we should get moving. My cabin is not far and you need proper food and rest." Josephine drank, the cool water soothing her raw throat. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. He had to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with small scars here and there that spoke of a hard life in wild country. But his eyes were gentle despite the obvious strength in every line of his body. "I am Josephine," she said. "Josephine Dalton, though I suppose I should not use that name anymore." "Josephine is a fine name," Marcus said. "The rest you can decide on later. "Can you ride? I can put you on my horse and I will walk alongside." "I can walk," she said, though in truth she was not certain she could make it 3 miles. But she did not want to be a burden to this man who had already done so much. Marcus seemed to see right through her. "Pride is a luxury you cannot afford right now. You are exhausted and half-starved. Ride." There was no arguing with that tone, spoken with such calm authority. Josephine allowed him to help her onto the big roan horse. He handed her the reins and began walking, leading the way along a trail that followed the river upstream. They traveled in silence for a while, Josephine swaying slightly in the saddle, fighting to stay awake. The motion of the horse was lulling after days of walking. She watched Marcus's broad back as he moved ahead of her, his long hair tied back with a leather cord, his rifle held ready but casual. He walked with the steady, ground, eating pace of someone who had spent years in the wilderness. "How did you know?" she finally asked. "That I was running, I mean, that I needed help." Marcus glanced back at her. "I saw the way he was tracking, saw the look on his face. I have seen wolves with that same expression when they are closing in on a kill. And then I saw you hiding, saw the terror in your eyes. It was not hard to put together. Most men would not have interfered. They would say it was between a husband and wife." "Most men are fools," Marcus said bluntly. "Seems to me that marriage should be a partnership, not ownership. My parents were married 35 years before my father died, and he never once raised a hand to my mother, never raised his voice even. That is how it should be." "Where are your parents now?" "Dead, both of them. Cholera took them and my 2 younger sisters back in '68, down in Kansas City. I could not save them, could not do anything but watch them die." His voice was flat, but Josephine could hear the old pain underneath. "After we buried them, I came up here into the mountains. Could not stand being in that city anymore, seeing all those places we had been together. I needed space, needed quiet, found both up here." "I am sorry," Josephine said softly, "for your loss. Thank you. It was 4 years ago now, but some days it feels like yesterday." He paused, then added, "Though I suppose you understand loss. You had to leave everything behind when you ran." "I did not have much to leave. Charles kept me isolated. I had no friends, no family left. Just a small house and a life that was slowly killing me." She shuddered, remembering. "He was not always cruel. When we courted, he was charming, attentive. It was only after we married that things changed, slowly at first, then faster. By the end, I was afraid to speak, afraid to move, afraid to breathe wrong." Marcus stopped walking and turned to look at her fully. In the fading light, his eyes were fierce. "You are well rid of him then, and you are braver than most for leaving. Many women would have stayed." "I nearly did. I stayed far longer than I should have. But when he put that gun to my head, something in me just snapped. I knew I had to run or die." "Well, you ran the right direction," Marcus said. "And you ran far enough. He is gone now, Josephine. You are free, free." The word sounded foreign to her ears, a concept she had almost forgotten. But as they continued up the trail and full darkness fell, Josephine began to believe it might actually be true. The cabin appeared suddenly, nestled in a grove of tall pines beside the river. It was larger than Josephine had expected, built of thick logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney from which no smoke currently rose. A small barn stood nearby, and she could see a well-tended garden patch to one side. Marcus helped her down from the horse with hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size. "Go on inside," he said. "I need to tend to the horse. There is a lantern just inside the door and matches on the table. Light it and make yourself comfortable. I will be in shortly." Josephine entered the cabin on shaking legs. The interior was simple but well kept. There was a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, a bed in one corner covered with thick furs, and shelves lined with supplies and tools. Pelts hung from the rafters, curing. She found the lantern and lit it, warm light filling the space. Marcus came in a few minutes later, carrying his saddlebags and her small bag, which he must have retrieved from his horse. He immediately set about building a fire, and soon flames were crackling cheerfully in the hearth. He filled a pot with water from a bucket and hung it over the fire to heat. "You should eat," he said, pulling dried meat and some kind of biscuits from a tin. "It is not fancy, but it is filling." Josephine ate slowly, her stomach protesting at first after days of barely any food. But Marcus was patient, making her drink water between bites. As warmth from the fire and the food spread through her body, she felt some of the terrible tension begin to ease. "You can have the bed," Marcus said. "I will sleep by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Josephine protested. "You have already done so much." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "You need proper rest, and that bed is a lot more comfortable than the floor. I have slept on worse than a bearskin by a fire, I promise you." She was too tired to argue further. Marcus turned his back politely while she changed into her other dress, which was only slightly less damp than the one she had been wearing. She lay down on the bed, which was indeed incredibly comfortable, stuffed with what felt like feathers and covered with soft furs. She thought she would lie awake, too keyed up by everything that had happened, but sleep claimed her almost instantly. She woke once in the night to see Marcus sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees, keeping watch. The sight made her feel safer than she had felt in years, and she drifted back to sleep with a small smile on her face. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of coffee. Josephine opened her eyes to find sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and Marcus moving quietly around the small space, preparing breakfast. He glanced over and saw her awake. "Morning," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in 3 years," Josephine admitted, sitting up. Her body still ached, but the bone-deep exhaustion had eased somewhat. "Good. I made coffee and there are biscuits and some preserves my neighbor made." Well, neighbor is a strong word. She lives about 10 miles south, but that counts as a neighbor out here. They ate together at the small table, and Josephine found herself studying Marcus in the morning light. He was handsome in a rough, untamed way, all hard angles and weathered skin. His hands were scarred from years of hard work, but they moved with precision as he cut his biscuit and spread preserves on it. "What will you do now?" he asked after a while. "Do you have anywhere to go? Family you can reach out to?" Josephine shook her head. "I have a sister in St. Louis, but I have not spoken to her in over a year. Charles did not allow me to write letters. I do not even know if she would take me in. You could write to her from here. I go down to the trading post about once a month. They have mail service there. I have no money to pay for passage to St. Louis, even if she would have me." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "You could stay here," he finally said. "For a while at least, until you figure out what you want to do next. There is plenty of room and I could use help with some things around the place. The garden needs tending and I am not much of a cook. It would be fair trade, room and board for help with chores." Josephine stared at him. "You would let me stay, a stranger? You are not a stranger anymore. And besides, seems wrong to send you off into the world with nothing after you just barely escaped with your life. Stay as long as you need. No obligations, no strings, just 2 people helping each other out." It was the kindest offer anyone had made to her in years, perhaps ever. Tears pricked at Josephine's eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Marcus looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair. "I told you about my sisters. They were younger than me, sweet girls who never hurt anyone. When they got sick, I could not save them. I had all this strength, all this ability to protect and provide, and it meant nothing. I could not fight cholera with my fists or my rifle. They died, and I was useless." He paused, looking down at his scarred hands. "When I saw you yesterday, saw that man hunting you, I knew I could do something about that. I could stop it. Maybe it is selfish, but it felt good to be able to protect someone for once, to actually make a difference." "It is not selfish," Josephine said softly. "It is human. And I am grateful beyond words." They fell into an easy silence, finishing their breakfast. After they ate, Marcus showed her around the property. The garden was indeed in need of attention, with weeds growing between the rows of beans and squash and potatoes. There was a chicken coop with half a dozen hens, and the small barn housed his horse and a milk cow. "I usually check my trap lines in the morning," Marcus explained. "I set them along the river and up in the high country. Then I come back midday to do work around here. It is a simple life, but it suits me." "It seems like a good life," Josephine said honestly. The peace of this place, the wild beauty of it, called to something deep inside her. Marcus left her to tend the garden while he went to check his traps. Josephine worked slowly, still regaining her strength, pulling weeds and watering the plants from buckets she drew from the well. The physical labor felt good, honest and clean. The sun was warm on her back, and the sound of the river was soothing. She was startled when Marcus returned several hours later, a brace of rabbits over his shoulder. He skinned and cleaned them with practiced efficiency, then showed her how he prepared them for cooking. They worked together to make a stew, and Josephine found herself relaxing in a way she had forgotten was possible. Marcus was easy to be around, his presence solid and reassuring without being oppressive. Over the following days, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Marcus would check his trap lines and hunt while Josephine tended the garden, fed the chickens, and managed the household tasks. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Marcus would tell her stories of his years in the mountains, the animals he had seen, the seasons he had weathered. Josephine, in turn, found herself opening up about her life before Charles, her childhood in independence, her parents, her dreams of becoming a teacher before circumstances had forced her into an early marriage. "You could still teach," Marcus said one evening. "There are settlements forming all through this territory. They always need teachers. I have no certificate, no formal training beyond what my own mother taught me. You can read and write and do figures. That is more than most out here can claim, and you have a gentle way about you." Children would respond to that. The idea took root in Josephine's mind, a small seed of possibility. But for now, she was content to simply exist in this peaceful space, healing from the wounds both visible and invisible that Charles had left on her. As weeks passed, Josephine noticed changes in herself. The constant fear that had been her companion for years began to fade. She laughed more easily. She slept through the night without nightmares. Her body grew stronger from the physical work and the good food. And she found herself watching Marcus with increasing awareness. He was unlike any man she had ever known. He was strong, yes, immensely so. She had seen him lift logs that would have taken two normal men to move, had watched him work for hours without seeming to tire. But that strength was tempered with gentleness. He was careful around her, always respectful, never raising his voice or moving too quickly in a way that might startle her. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, asking thoughtful questions and remembering small details she mentioned. One afternoon, about a month after her arrival, Josephine was working in the garden when she heard Marcus call her name urgently. She straightened up to see him running toward her from the direction of the river, his face alarmed. "Get in the cabin," he said tersely. "Now. And stay away from the windows." Fear spiked through her. Is it Charles? Did he come back? No, Grizzly. Big male coming this way. I saw him down by the river. Get inside. Josephine ran for the cabin, her heart pounding. She had heard stories of grizzly bears, their strength and ferocity. Marcus followed her in and barred the door, then took up his rifle and positioned himself by the window. They waited in tense silence. After what felt like an eternity, Josephine heard it, the heavy sound of something large moving through the underbrush. Through the gap in the shutters, she caught a glimpse of brown fur, a massive humped shoulder, a head that seemed impossibly large. The bear stopped near the chicken coop, sniffing the air. The hens inside were making frantic noises. Marcus raised his rifle slowly, sighting down the barrel. "Please do not shoot unless you have to," Josephine whispered. She did not know why it mattered, but the thought of that magnificent creature being killed bothered her. Marcus glanced at her, surprised, then nodded. "I would rather not. Bear meat is tough, and killing one just brings his family around looking for revenge sometimes. I will only shoot if he tries to break in." They watched as the bear circled the cabin, sniffing and huffing. It was enormous, easily 8 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs to paw at the cabin wall. The whole structure shook. Josephine bit back a gasp. But Marcus stood steady, his rifle trained on the animal, his finger on the trigger but not pulling. Finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, the bear dropped back to all fours and ambled away into the forest. They waited another 30 minutes before Marcus carefully opened the door and checked outside. "He is gone," he announced, "headed up into the high country." Josephine let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. That was terrifying. "That was living in bear country," Marcus said with a slight smile. "They come around sometimes, especially in summer when food is plentiful. As long as you respect them and do not get between a mother and her cubs, they usually leave you alone. Have you ever had to shoot one?" "Once, a few years back. A female came into the cabin while I was out and destroyed half my supplies. When I came back and surprised her, she charged. I did not have a choice." He paused. "I did not like it, though. Felt wrong somehow, killing something just for being what it was." Josephine looked at him with new understanding. This hard, strong man had a soft heart beneath all that muscle and leather. The realization made her own heart skip in an entirely different way than fear had caused. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Josephine found herself more aware than ever of Marcus's presence. The way the firelight played across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw beneath his beard. The way his hands, so large and capable, were gentle as he whittled a piece of wood into the shape of a small bird. "Who is that for?" she asked, watching him work. "You if you want it," he said, not looking up. "I saw you watching the wrens that nest in the barn, thought you might like a little carving." Something warm bloomed in Josephine's chest. "That is very thoughtful. I like working with my hands when I have idle time, helps me think." "What do you think about?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, the knife moving steadily over the wood. "Lately, I think about how much better this cabin feels with someone else in it. How much I had gotten used to being alone, and how I did not realize how lonely I was until you arrived and I was not lonely anymore." Josephine's breath caught. She watched him, trying to read his expression in the firelight. "Marcus, He finally looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers. "I know this is not the time. I know you are still healing from what that bastard did to you. But I would be dishonest if I did not tell you that having you here has changed things for me. You have changed things." "How?" Josephine asked softly. "I came up here to hide from the world after my family died. I told myself I was just taking time to grieve, but the truth is I was giving up on living, just going through the motions. Then you stumbled into my life, all fierce determination and courage wrapped up in terror, and you reminded me what it means to fight for something, to want something better than just existing. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different from the tears of fear and pain she had shed so many times before. You saved my life. I think about what would have happened if you had not been there that day, and it makes me sick. But then I think about everything since, the kindness you have shown me, the way you have given me space to heal, and I realize you did more than save my life. You gave me a reason to want to live it. Marcus set down his carving and the knife, giving her his full attention. I do not want to rush you or pressure you. You can stay here as long as you want, whether that means something more between us or not. I just needed you to know how I feel. Josephine stood up slowly and crossed to where he sat. She reached out tentatively and touched his face, her fingers brushing against his bearded cheek. He went very still, barely breathing. I am afraid, she admitted. I am afraid of trust, afraid of being hurt again. But when I am with you, I feel safe. You make me feel like myself again, like the woman I was before Charles took that away from me. And I think maybe I am starting to feel something more than gratitude. Marcus reached up and gently covered her hand with his own, pressing it against his cheek. Then we take it slow. We take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere. In the weeks that followed, their relationship deepened and evolved. Marcus courted her with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows. He taught her to fish in the river, standing behind her to show her how to cast the line, his arms around her making her feel protected and treasured rather than trapped. He read to her in the evenings from his small collection of books, his deep voice bringing the words to life. Josephine, for her part, found herself falling for him slowly but surely. She loved the way he laughed, a deep rumbling sound that came from his chest. She loved his patience with the animals, the way he spoke softly to his horse and the chickens. She loved that despite his immense strength, he never used it to intimidate or control. Instead, he used it to protect, to build, to help. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Marcus took her hand. It was not the first time they had held hands, but something about this moment felt different, weighted with significance. Josephine, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. Her heart skipped. What is it? I am in love with you. I know it is probably too soon, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. Every day I spend with you makes me more certain. You are strong and kind and brave, and you make this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep. I love you, and I will wait as long as it takes for you to be ready to hear that and maybe, someday, to say it back. Josephine felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but she was smiling. You do not have to wait, she whispered. I love you too, Marcus. I have been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but it is true. I love you. The joy that lit up his face was like sunrise. He cupped her face in his large, calloused hands with infinite care. Can I kiss you? Yes, she breathed. His kiss was gentle, reverent, nothing like the harsh, demanding kisses Charles had forced on her. Marcus kissed her like she was precious, like she was a gift he could scarcely believe he had been given. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret giving me this chance, Marcus said, his forehead resting against hers. I know you will, Josephine said. I trust you. Those 3 words meant everything, and they both knew it. Trust was what Charles had shattered, what had seemed impossible to ever feel again. But Marcus had rebuilt it, piece by patient piece, until Josephine could offer it freely once more. As summer deepened into August, their love grew and flourished like the garden Josephine tended. They grew more comfortable with each other. stealing kisses when Marcus came back from his trap lines, holding each other in the evenings as they watched the fire. Marcus moved his sleeping area to the barn, wanting to give Josephine her own space, but she found herself missing his presence in the cabin at night. One evening she told him so. "I sleep better when I know you are near," she admitted. "Would you consider, maybe, putting your bedroll on the other side of the cabin? I am not ready for more than that yet, but I would like to have you close." Marcus agreed readily, and that night he made up his bed on the far side of the room, a respectful distance from hers. But just knowing he was there, hearing his steady breathing, made Josephine feel safe in a way she had not since she was a child in her parents' home. September brought cooler weather, and the changing of the leaves to brilliant reds and golds. Marcus began preparing for winter, hunting deer and elk to smoke and preserve, chopping enormous amounts of firewood, checking the roof for leaks. Josephine helped however she could, harvesting the garden, preserving vegetables, sewing warmer clothes for both of them from fabric Marcus purchased on a trip to the trading post. It was on that trip that Marcus brought back something unexpected: a letter for Josephine from her sister in St. Louis. Marcus had sent a letter weeks earlier at Josephine's request, explaining that she was safe and asking if her sister would be willing to correspond. Josephine opened the letter with shaking hands. As she read, tears began to fall. "What is wrong?" Marcus asked, concerned. "Is she all right?" "She is fine," Josephine said, smiling through her tears. "She is just happy I am safe. She says she was so worried when she heard I married Charles that she tried to visit several times, but he always made excuses and would not let her in. She feared the worst, and she is so relieved that I got away from him." Josephine read further. "She wants me to come to St. Louis to live with her and her husband." Marcus's expression shuddered slightly. "That is good, that you have family who wants to help you." Josephine looked at him carefully. "You do not want me to go. I want you to be happy and safe," Marcus said quietly. "If that means going to St. Louis, then that is what you should do. I will not stand in the way of what is best for you." "What is best for me," Josephine said firmly, "is being here with you. St. Louis is crowded and loud, and I would be dependent on my sister's charity. Here I have purpose. I have peace. I have you. I want to stay, Marcus, if you will have me." The relief and joy on his face answered before his words did. "I will have you for as long as you will stay, forever if you will let me." "Forever sounds perfect," Josephine said, and kissed him to seal the promise. As autumn progressed toward winter, Marcus began to bring up the subject of marriage. "I know you might be wary of it after Charles," he said carefully one evening, "but I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. I want to marry you, Josephine, make you my wife in the eyes of God and the law, but only if that is what you want, only if you are ready." Josephine had been thinking about the same thing. The idea of marriage no longer filled her with dread when she thought of it in terms of Marcus. "I want that too," she said. "But I need to know, is it even legal? I was married to Charles. I do not know if running away dissolved that bond." "I made some inquiries at the trading post," Marcus admitted. "There is a circuit judge who comes through twice a year. I spoke to him last time he was there. He said that abandonment by both parties can be grounds for dissolving a marriage, especially if there was abuse involved. He said if we can prove Charles has not looked for you or tried to contact you in 6 months, and if you testify to the abuse, he can grant you a dissolution and marry us the same day." 6 months from when she had run would be November. They were in late September now. "So we wait," Josephine said. "We wait 6 more weeks and then we can be married properly." "I will wait as long as it takes," Marcus said, pulling her close. "You are worth waiting for." Those 6 weeks passed both slowly and quickly. The first snow fell in mid-October, dusting the mountains with white. Marcus taught Josephine to shoot his rifle, insisting she needed to know how to protect herself when he was out on his trap lines. She proved to be a natural, her hands steady and her eyes sharp. "You are full of surprises," Marcus said admiringly after she hit 3 targets in a row. "I used to go hunting with my father when I was a girl," Josephine explained. "Before he died, before everything changed, I had forgotten how good it felt." November arrived cold and clear. Marcus made the trip to the trading post to confirm the judge's schedule, and returned with good news. The judge would be there the 3rd week of November, and he remembered Marcus's inquiry and would be prepared to hear their case. They made the journey together on a crisp November morning, both of them bundled in furs and riding Marcus's horse double. The trading post was a rough collection of buildings in a clearing, serving trappers and hunters and the few settlers who braved this wild country. The judge, a stern-looking man named Abernathy, listened to Josephine's story with grave attention. She told him everything, showing him the faint scars that remained from Charles's worst beatings, explaining the fear and the desperation that had driven her to run. "And you have had no contact with this man Dalton since June?" the judge asked. "None, Your Honor. He has not looked for me or sent any word." The judge looked at Marcus. "And you are willing to testify that you turned this man away when he came pursuing her?" "I am, Your Honor." Judge Abernathy nodded slowly. "Given the circumstances, the evidence of abuse, and the clear abandonment by both parties, I am prepared to grant a dissolution of your marriage to Charles Dalton. As of this moment, Josephine, you are a free woman, no longer bound to that man." The relief that washed over Josephine was profound. She was truly free, legally and completely. "Now," the judge said with a small smile, "I understand there is another matter you wish to bring before me." Marcus and Josephine exchanged glances, both of them grinning. "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said. "We would like to be married." The ceremony was simple, conducted in the trading post's main room with the proprietor and his wife serving as witnesses. Josephine wore her best dress, which Marcus had helped her sew from fabric he had purchased for this occasion, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. Marcus had trimmed his beard and hair, though he still looked every inch the mountain man in his buckskins and boots. When Judge Abernathy pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her with a joy and tenderness that made Josephine's heart overflow. She was married again, but this time it was to a man who loved her, who respected her, who would never raise a hand to her in anger. This time, it was right. They spent their wedding night at the trading post, in a small room the proprietor rented out. It was their first night truly alone as husband and wife, and Josephine felt nervous anticipation rather than fear. Marcus was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished every moment. When they finally came together, it was beautiful in a way Josephine had never imagined possible, an expression of love and trust rather than a duty or a punishment. Afterward, lying in Marcus's arms with her head on his broad chest, listening to his heartbeat, Josephine felt a peace she had never known. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Marcus rumbled, his hand stroking her hair. "My brave, beautiful wife." They returned to the cabin a few days later to find everything just as they had left it, the chickens pecking in the yard, the cabin cozy and welcoming. Winter set in fully over the following weeks, snow piling high around the cabin. But inside, they were warm and happy. They spent long evenings talking and reading, making love and making plans for the future. "Come spring," Marcus said one night, "I thought we might expand the cabin. Add another room, maybe 2, for the future." Josephine smiled, her hand drifting to her belly where she suspected, though it was too early to be certain, that their first child might already be growing. That sounds perfect. Winter passed in a blur of white snow and warm fires. Josephine's suspicion proved correct, and by February she was certain she was pregnant. Marcus was overjoyed, though also nervous, fussing over her and trying to prevent her from doing any work he thought might be too strenuous. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Josephine laughed, pushing him away when he tried to carry water buckets for her. "I can still do my work." "I know, I just worry. I want you safe, want both of you safe." His protectiveness was sweet rather than suffocating, and Josephine loved him for it. She loved watching him prepare for fatherhood, carving a cradle from smooth pine, making tiny clothes with stitches that were charmingly uneven. Spring came with a rush of green growth and melting snow. True to his word, Marcus began expanding the cabin with help from a few neighboring trappers who came by. They added 2 rooms, one for storage and supplies, and one that would serve as a nursery. In late September, exactly 1 year after she had agreed to marry Marcus, Josephine went into labor. Marcus rode hard to fetch the midwife from the nearest settlement, a capable woman named Mrs. Harper, who had delivered dozens of babies in her time. The labor was long and difficult, but Marcus stayed by Josephine's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragements. When their son finally entered the world, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Josephine wept with joy. Marcus held the tiny infant in his large, scarred hands with infinite tenderness, his eyes shining with tears. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You did amazing, Josephine. He is perfect." They named him Thomas, after Josephine's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes, and from the beginning it was clear he had inherited his father's strength. He was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and who seemed fascinated by everything around him. The years that followed were full and happy. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler who loved following his father around, trying to help with chores in his own clumsy way. Josephine wrote regular letters to her sister, who visited once and was charmed by Marcus and the life they had built. 2 years after Thomas was born, Josephine gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who had her father's build and her mother's gentle spirit. And 3 years after that, another son arrived, James, who seemed to be a perfect combination of both his parents. Through it all, Marcus and Josephine's love only deepened. They worked side by side, raising their children, building their life in the mountains. Marcus taught the children to hunt and fish and respect the wild land around them. Josephine taught them to read and write, and showed them how to tend the ever-expanding garden. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch as the sun set over the mountains, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 9, was teaching his younger siblings how to skip stones in the river. Sarah's laughter rang out clear and bright as her stone bounced 3 times before sinking. "Did you ever imagine this?" Josephine asked, leaning against Marcus's broad shoulder. "That day at the 3rd river when you stood between me and Charles, did you imagine we would end up here?" Marcus wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I hoped," he admitted. "From the moment I saw you, terrified but determined not to give up, I felt something. I did not know it was love yet, but I knew I wanted to know you, to help you, to be part of your life somehow, and every day since has been better than I could have imagined." "He never came back, you know," Josephine said quietly. She rarely spoke of Charles anymore, the memories having faded like old bruises. "I used to have nightmares that he would find us, but he never did." "I heard he died a few years back," Marcus said. "Gambled away everything he had and drank himself to death. One of the traders told me." I did not want to mention it and bring up bad memories. Josephine was quiet for a moment, processing this information. She felt no grief, only a distant relief. "Then I am truly free of him in every way." You were free of him the moment you ran, Marcus said firmly. The rest was just paperwork and fate catching up. Their youngest, James, ran up to the porch, his face flushed and happy. "Papa, Mama, come see. Thomas caught a fish." They walked down to the river together, Marcus carrying James on his shoulders, Josephine's hand in his. At the water's edge, Thomas proudly held up a large trout while Sarah clapped and danced around him. This was her life now, Josephine thought. Not running, not hiding, not living in fear. Just this. Love and laughter and the wild beauty of the mountains. A strong man who cherished her, children who grew like wildflowers, free and happy. She had crossed 2 rivers fleeing a cruel husband, and at the third, a mountain man had sent that husband back and given her a future instead. Years continued to pass in gentle rhythm with the seasons. The cabin expanded again as the children grew, and Marcus built a separate workshop where he could craft the furniture and tools they needed. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, eventually taking over more of the hunting and trapping duties. Sarah became a skilled herbalist, learning from Mrs. Harper and the few Native American women who traded at the post, creating medicines and remedies that became sought after throughout the region. James, the youngest, had a gift for working with animals, and under his care, their small farm expanded to include more livestock. Josephine found her old dream realized in an unexpected way. Families had begun settling in the valleys below their mountain home, and she started teaching the children who lived within riding distance. Her kitchen table became a schoolroom several days a week, and she loved watching young minds open to reading and arithmetic. Marcus built a small 1-room schoolhouse near the trading post, and by the time Josephine was 40, she was the official teacher for the growing community, respected and beloved. On their 20th anniversary, their children, now grown, organized a celebration. Thomas had married a young woman named Emma from one of the settler families, and they had given Marcus and Josephine their first grandchild, a girl named Josephine after her grandmother. Sarah was being courted by the blacksmith's son, a gentle young man who looked at her like she hung the moon. James, at 15, was still too young for such things, but he had a kind heart and his father's quiet strength. The celebration was held at the cabin that had been home for 2 decades. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, bringing food and music. As Josephine danced with Marcus under the stars, his arms still as strong as they had been that day at the 3rd river, she marveled at the journey that had brought them here. "I would do it all again," she whispered to him as they swayed to the fiddle music. Every terrifying moment of running, every fear, every hardship if it meant ending up here with you. Marcus kissed her forehead, then her lips. "You are the bravest person I have ever known. You saved yourself that night you ran. I just helped you finish the journey." "We saved each other," Josephine corrected. "You were hiding up here, remember? Giving up on life, I gave you a reason to live again." "That you did," he agreed with a smile. "That you did." As the party continued around them, their children and grandchild nearby, their friends celebrating, Josephine felt a completeness that she knew was rare and precious. She had survived the darkness and found the light. She had run from cruelty and found kindness. She had crossed 2 rivers in terror and met love at the 3rd. The mountain man who had stood between her and death had become her husband, her partner, her home. And every day for the rest of their lives, they would wake up grateful for the chance encounter that had changed everything, for the courage it took to run and the courage it took to stand and fight, for the love that had grown from the ashes of fear into something beautiful and enduring. In the distance, the 3 rivers flowed on, the Little Blue, the Big Blue, and the Kansas, carrying their waters toward the distant sea. But Josephine and Marcus needed to travel no further. They had found their home, their haven, their happily ever after right here in the wild mountains of the Kansas Territory, built on love and forged in the fire of survival. Their story would be told for generations in the growing communities of the region. The tale of the brave woman who crossed 2 rivers fleeing a cruel husband, and the mountain man who met him at the third and sent him back, and how love bloomed between them in the wilderness. Children would grow up hearing about Josephine and Marcus Zimmerman, about their courage and their kindness, about how they built a life together that became a foundation for an entire community. Thomas would eventually take over his father's trapping business, expanding it into a successful trading operation. Sarah would become the region's most respected healer, her remedies and knowledge saving countless lives. James would develop their land into a thriving ranch, using the gentleness he had learned from his parents to breed and raise horses that were known throughout the territory for their temperament and strength. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this perfect night in late November 1882, Josephine and Marcus simply held each other and danced, surrounded by the family and community they had built, grateful for every moment that had led them to each other. As the years continued to unfold, they aged together with grace. Marcus's dark hair turned silver, but his strength remained, though he moved a bit slower. Josephine's face gained lines around her eyes from years of smiling and squinting at books, teaching children their letters. They remained devoted to each other, still holding hands when they walked, still stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking. Their grandchildren multiplied, and there was nothing Marcus and Josephine loved more than having the little ones visit, filling the cabin with laughter and chaos. Marcus would carve toys for them as he had once carved a wooden bird for their grandmother, and Josephine would tell them stories, both from books and from her own life, though she kept the darkest parts of her past hidden. The children did not need to know about Charles Dalton and the cruelty she had fled. They only needed to know about love and safety and family. On their 30th anniversary, they returned to the place where they had first met, the rise above the Kansas River where Marcus had stood between Josephine and her pursuer. The spot had changed little, though a road now ran near it, and a small settlement had sprung up a few miles away. They stood together in the same place where Marcus's horse had blocked the trail, where he had faced down an armed man with nothing but his courage, and his conviction that what was happening was wrong. "I can still see you," Josephine said softly, "hiding behind that boulder so frightened you could barely breathe." "And I can still see him," Marcus said, his voice harder, "hunting you like an animal. I have never regretted what I did that day, Josephine, not for a single moment." "I know," she said, taking his hand, "and I have spent 30 years being grateful for your courage, for you." They had brought a small stone cairn with them, and together they built it on that spot, a marker of where their life together had truly begun. On a smooth river stone, Marcus had carved a simple inscription. "Here, love conquered fear. November 1872. It was not dated to the exact day, but the year was right, the year everything had changed for both of them. They left the cairn there, a monument to survival and second chances, to the moment when one person's courage had saved another's life and in doing so had saved his own. They lived to celebrate their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The cabin in the mountains was no longer their primary residence. They had moved to a comfortable house near the schoolhouse where Josephine had taught for so many years. But they visited the cabin often, unable to let go of the place where they had built their love. Marcus died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72, with Josephine beside him as she had been for 42 years of marriage. His last words were, "I love you, my brave girl," and Josephine held those words in her heart like a treasure. She lived another 5 years without him, supported by her devoted children and the community that loved her. She continued teaching almost until the end, her mind sharp even as her body weakened. And when she died at 77, surrounded by family, her last thoughts were of a young mountain man with kind blue eyes who had stood between her and death and given her a life worth living. They were buried together on a hill overlooking the 3 rivers, the Little Blue, the Big Blue, and the Kansas. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names and the years of their lives, but more importantly, bore the inscription, "She crossed 2 rivers fleeing. He met her at the 3rd. Together, they found home." The story of Josephine and Marcus Zimmerman became legend in the growing state of Kansas. It was told as a love story, yes, but also as a story of courage and redemption, of standing up against cruelty and choosing compassion. The schoolhouse where Josephine had taught was eventually named after her, and the trail that ran past the place where they first met became known as Zimmerman's Trail. Their descendants thrived, carrying forward the values of strength and gentleness, courage and compassion that Marcus and Josephine had embodied. The trading post grew into a town, the town into a city, but the story remained, passed down through generations. And sometimes, it was said, on quiet evenings when the light slanted gold across the rivers, you could see 2 figures standing on the rise above the Kansas River, hand in hand, looking out over the land they had loved. The brave woman who had run for her life, and the mountain man who had given her a reason to live it, together forever in the place where their story began. But that was just legend, stories told around fires and dinner tables. The truth was simpler and more profound. Josephine Zimmerman had found the courage to save herself, and Marcus Zimmerman had found the courage to save another, and in doing so, they had built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. They had built a love that was true and strong, a family that carried their legacy forward, and a story that reminded everyone who heard it that courage and compassion could change everything. That one moment of standing up against cruelty could ripple outward through generations. The 3 rivers flowed on, as they always had and always would, carrying water to the distant sea. But the story of what happened beside those rivers in 1872, when a desperate woman crossed 2 and met her salvation at the 3rd, would flow on too, as long as there were people who believed in love, in second chances, in the power of one person to change another's entire world. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy of all.